Hello, and welcome to our webinar presentation, Using Local Knowledge in Disaster Preparedness, introducing a new mobile app for public health disaster planners. I'm Dottie Bernard from the Emergency Preparedness Research Evaluation and Practice Program at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. This presentation is a partnership between Harvard and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We're excited to present the new app we developed to advance the nation's public health goal of effective disaster planning. This shows what we're going to cover today. We'll begin by defining what we mean by local knowledge. Then we'll talk about why local knowledge is important in disaster planning, particularly for vulnerable populations. We'll move on to the main part of our presentation and show you the new app we've developed. We'll explain how the app can address the unique needs of vulnerable populations in disaster planning. We'll conclude by answering some common questions about the app. Now, let's dive in. What is local knowledge? Local knowledge is a community system of concepts, values, attitudes, and beliefs generated by community members over time. It includes social cohesion strategies and communications capabilities. Local knowledge is rarely formally recorded or recognized by outsiders, and consequently may not be familiar to public health or emergency management planners. However, leveraging the knowledge, capabilities, and assets of a community makes a comprehensive disaster plan more effective because it encompasses the specific and unique characteristics of a community. Let's look at a few examples. Over time, members of a community may have learned which streets in their neighborhoods are prone to flooding or the locations of high crime areas. The community may follow certain communications methods that they've found to be reliable, quick, and efficient for their members, such as certain Facebook pages or apps. Some communities without internet access may prefer to text each other or meet in person. There are a number of factors that may affect a community member's susceptibility to a disaster, including socioeconomic status, English language proficiency, medical conditions and disability, social isolation, and age or gender. I'd like to pause for a moment to point out that we are careful to define vulnerability by function instead of by determinant or cause. For planning purposes, we describe vulnerability categories based on the type of function that requires assistance. Someone may have difficulty with verbal communication for any number of reasons. They may be a non-English speaker or have a disability that impacts their ability to speak, such as a brain injury. Unfortunately, these groups may be disproportionately vulnerable to disasters such as pandemic, severe weather, or other natural or man-made emergencies. We'll now turn to a discussion of community needs during a disaster. Recognizing and planning for community needs is a critical step in disaster planning. Here, we see a number of common concerns that arise during a disaster, including questions about evacuation guidance, sheltering, and satisfying basic physical needs. In addition, the need for accurate and current information about a disaster is a common and critical concern for many community members. As you can see, vulnerable populations face additional complications in a disaster due to their unique needs. For example, the already challenging process of distributing evacuation instructions to a population may be complicated for community members who need to receive timely instructions in their own language. These populations may have concerns about a municipally run disaster shelter. Community members with medical needs may seek information and support related to their health conditions. In a disaster, everyone wants to stay informed, and vulnerable populations are no exception. However, they may have trust issues regarding traditional spokespeople. That was the genesis of this project. Harvard has worked to link resources, to community needs by studying vulnerabilities and identifying the types of resources needed to address these gaps. Then we engage community leaders to learn how we might leverage local knowledge to help meet these gaps and improve disaster preparedness planning. Our goal is to integrate local knowledge into the disaster planning process. To develop the mobile application, we interviewed 106 community leaders who represented vulnerable populations in Florida, Massachusetts, West Virginia, and Puerto Rico. The interviewees talked about specific community local knowledge that could be leveraged to help disaster preparedness. Results from the interviews were organized into three categories: local knowledge about communications, trust-based local knowledge, and spatial-based local knowledge. Local knowledge is a valuable and untapped resource that can facilitate disaster response and recovery planning efforts. Let's look at a few examples. Members of a particular community group may favor distributing and receiving information in informal settings, such as coffee shops, cafes, and at social events, rather than attending information sessions held in libraries or schools. Faith-based organization staff and members may view their place of worship as a safe refuge in a disaster and prefer to shelter there instead of a municipally managed disaster shelter. Communities may rely on their own members for spiritual support and mental health counseling after a disaster. Rather than trying to fit an existing plan into a community that has preferences like this, it's much more effective to adapt to community preferences. Here's another example. Often, news is passed through a community via local radio stations that broadcast in languages other than English. These stations may not have a broad geographic reach due to their low power, but serve as an effective communications distributor. For example, public health planners may help ensure that community members understand evacuation instructions by translating the instructions into other languages to be played over these local radio stations. Finally, a community may prefer a trusted figure or organization to provide information about disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. These trusted messengers usually have pre-existing relationships with a specific community group due to ethnicity, cultural preferences, or familiarity with the group members. Let's look at one particularly serious issue facing planners: reaching out effectively to community members who may not speak or read English. Instructions regarding evacuation and transportation issues, disaster sheltering, and satisfying basic needs such as food and water may need to be translated into other languages. But just as importantly, we should consider alternative communication methods that are well known or local common knowledge. It may be more efficient and effective to distribute this information using the community members' own preferences for meeting places or local radio stations. Local knowledge may indicate that it may also be better to use trusted figures or organizations to distribute disaster information. These entities may have built trust over time with a community group during everyday life, making them more trusted in emergency situations. Examples of some trust-based organizations may be nonprofit entities or residence councils. Collaborating with these trusted messengers in crafting and distributing disaster information is critical. Using the wrong communication channel may have serious consequences if a community group is not kept in the information loop. Our solution to addressing the problems of helping vulnerable populations is an app developed for public health disaster planners that helps them understand and access a community's local knowledge. This local knowledge can be used in their disaster planning. What's unique about the app is that it contains data that's closest to the source, as it's data gathered from community leaders that represent vulnerable populations. Our app is designed to collect information that's useful for emergency planning purposes by asking community leaders to enter data that focuses on local knowledge.
Hello, everyone. This is a live demonstration of the REACH app. The REACH app was developed by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. This project is supported by Broad Agency Announcement 2016-N-1770, Public Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Applied Research, funded by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. The content of this presentation, as well as the views and discussions expressed, are solely those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent the views of the CDC. Nor does mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. The REACH app was created to better reach vulnerable populations during public health emergencies. The REACH app is designed to engage community leaders in compiling a directory of community resources that can be useful in emergency planning. These resources reflect the local knowledge of community leaders and capture their hands-on experiences with the communities they serve. Most of these resources are particularly useful for communicating to specific segments of the population that may have limited English proficiency, be of low socioeconomic position, or may access different resources based on their community characteristics. As you can see on the screen, the app includes 4 features: resources, social network platform, calendar events, and a feature to share the app. This demonstration focuses on the first of these features, resources. When we select the resource feature, you'll see various categories of services generated from interviews with community leaders. The resources and services I'm showing you are based on the local knowledges of community leaders in Brockton and Boston. However, any community could populate the app with their own resource. Let's take a look at one of these services, translators. When we click translators, we see a list of the translators recommended to us by the community leaders with their distance to me now. We also have the ability to change the view of this page to a map of the resources and their proximity to me. If we take a look at one of these translators, community interpreter services, we see a screen with a description of their services, contact information, and a map. It also gives the user the ability to call them, get directions to their location, and even leave a rating or review. Unlike traditional resource searches, those provided by the REACH app are nonprofit and specifically focused on aiding members of vulnerable populations. I'd now like to show you another unique resource that is provided by the REACH app. If we click on meeting places, we see a list of places where members of the community typically meet to discuss issues. These places are of particular value to emergency planners as they provide a location to provide information to members of the community. These places are another example of how the REACH app provides emergency planners with resources not found using traditional search methods like Yelp or Google Maps. I'm now also going to show you the map of these locations in Brockton. Lastly, I would like to demonstrate how a user can upload a service to the REACH app. If we click on the icon in the top left corner of the screen, we're taken to a new screen that allows us to add a listing. Clicking on this enables us to provide a detailed description of the resource recommended to us by a community leader. Clicking on Select Category gives us a drop-down menu of all the resource categories. You can then fill out the resource or group name, contact information, description, and even upload an image of the resource. It is our hope the REACH app will not only strengthen the ability for emergency planners to tailor their preparedness efforts to members of vulnerable populations in their community, but will also increase the collective efficacy and social cohesion of the communities they serve. If you are interested in learning more about the REACH app, please reach out to preparedness@hsph.harvard.edu. Thank you for your time.
Let's talk about some questions regarding the app. In terms of available platforms, the app can be used on a mobile phone or tablet, as well as via a website version that can be accessed by a laptop or desktop computer. As for uploading media, the app allows community leaders to upload photos, videos, and other social media links. Users have given us some great feedback about the many uses they envision for our new app, including alerting community members where to go for a flu test, or the most efficient and effective ways of distributing information on potential closures of school or other community events. This project is supported by Broad Agency Announcement 2016 N17770, Public Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Applied Research, funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the CDC. We appreciate you taking the time to view this session about local knowledge and using our new app to apply local knowledge to disaster planning.